Turn a little towards me, Bob. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Your neck also?
Well, it's been 17 years since I had a last opportunity to videotape Bob, and I think that's entirely appropriate because there's 17 chapters in Finnegan's Wake. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Dobbs.
Tonight, just across the border, the Americans are singing, dancing, and wigging out. And we all learned around the world that that was the best time to do a bank heist. So we're going in. We're going to start drilling, and when the tumblers turn, we're going in and we're going to get something. Okay. So it always begins with Air Canada here. I was coming up from New York a couple weeks ago, and the En Route magazine had a big exclusive on Pam Anderson, 4 views of an international icon. Now, with that in mind, we begin with the situation that right now, ontologically speaking, that means our being, what we think to be, and what we seem to be, is that we are 1/5 screen, 1/5 chip, 1/5 neuron, 1/5 astrobody, and 1/5 archetype. That's what we are constitutionally made up of, despite what the Genome Project is working towards. They're only working towards the 1/5 neuron. Now, we're 5 parts. So, it's right here in the analysis of Pam. There are 4 views, and the first one, by Greg Diamond, describes her as a TV star. That's the screen element. And he says, concluding how she was able to continue and keep her career going by entering into a soap opera situation where the episodic TV work she now gets can almost be considered an afterthought, a mere adjunct to Pam's appearances on Entertainment Tonight and Extra, where she describes her latest personal crises. Then he ends by saying she's the woman who slipped into a bathing suit, grabbed her surfboard, and deftly rode the wave of a culture that had irrevocably blurred the line between public and private. That's 1/5 we're describing here, the TV screen part. The second person, Clive Thompson, describes her as the first lady of the internet. Now he's decided that because the internet sort of started from his point of view in 95, 96, but didn't really take off until the video of her and her husband was available, and that any site, and every site, including people trying to get jobs as lawyers, offering online resumes, would say they had her videotape to get attention. So he decided that laughable, yes, crazy, yes, but hey, so is the net. I've long argued that cyberspace functions as a sort of id release mechanism. Online, people are more outre, more flamboyant, more indulgent of their fantasies. Is it any wonder, then, that the zeitgeist of the digital world turned out to be the world's most cartoonish, surreal, spilling out of her top babe? Anderson's career started off with an enormous pixelated image on a jumbotron, and in some ways it's never left. So there, this journalist is picking up the 1/5 part, the chip part, the internet. The next journalist, this is the June issue, if you ever wanted to look it up, Annabelle Lyon, describes her as a real woman and goes into a lot of details about her past and how she got implants, and says, even when Pamela showed signs of human fear and frailty by having the most famous pieces of silicone in the world removed from her body, responses ranged from cynical to distantly bemused. Now, we're looking at the human archetype interpretation here. She says, the journalist says, probably it's the spirit of the age. We wear irony like stilettos, a spiky attitude like fashion. but contempt is too easy a response. We can scorn the image, but what about the woman who was brave enough to correct those big mistakes? Maybe while the rest of us work ourselves into a cynical, deconstructive frenzy, Pam deserves the last laugh after all. So what you have here is someone focusing on the archetypal human scale level, that she's a real woman. Other guy says she's a first lady of the internet, Chip. The first one says she's TV star, eternal TV star. That's the 1/5 TV screen. The fourth journalist titles it, Andrew Piper has long lost sweetheart. Now he decided that her career really was successful because he reminded everybody, and especially him, of his first love, Michelle Jones, when he was 12 years old, in that awkward period between just before puberty and after. Who is Michelle Jones? My first love, of course. We fell for each other in that brief period between thumb-sucking childhood and fashion-conscious adolescence, when categories such as rocker or nerd or hick or babe didn't matter, and there were only boys and girls. Michelle and I dated as best we could for grade 5. He goes on. But the point is, he decides that really Pamela's success is due to the fact she strikes me as the kind of girl you might have known yourself years before she went down to L.A. to become a star, who did whatever regrettable things she had to do to make a go of it, but who remains in some essential way your own Michelle Jones. So we have 2/5 left, astrobody or neuron. What is that? Long lost sweetheart. That is neuron, memory. All right? Now, of course, a magazine like this is going to leave out the astrobody. Who believes in astrobodies? You know, it's actually that maybe the spiritual cultures in China or India would mention the astrobody element. But I rest my case that 4 out of 5 shows that there is an unconscious assumption that we consist of 5 parts. Now, how do we get here? How do we get to this situation? That's what we're going to work on tonight. Okay. We begin with 1839, 1840, when the photograph and the telegraph are discovered. Now that situation moved us out of the literary phase and the print phase and the pre-telegraph newspaper phase. But the unconscious factor that was being built by humanity was the cloning of ESP. Now how do we get the cloning ESP? In 1953, Crick and Watson make the big discovery about the DNA code, and they begin to work on that. There was another thing that was discovered in 1953 that no one ever really understood, acknowledged, or appreciated, and that was that Edmund Carpenter, Don Thiel, and Marshall McLuhan in Toronto figured out what James Joyce had mastered in Finnegan's Wake, which came out in 1939. They realized that Joyce had tapped into the macro mimic code, not the genetic code, the mimic code. The mimic code was the collective effects of new communication environments that determined cultures, how they would interpret other cultures, how they would project their thoughts in their own culture, and the famous phrase, the medium is the message, applied to communication environments over history, supplemented by Harold Inness's work. It was that discovery that McLuhan made in 53 which indicated a key to a programming of people and cultures by the means of communication. So we had 2 breakthroughs in 53, the genetic one and the mimic one, we'll call it. Now, if we go back to the idea that cloning ESP is a phrase referring to the mimic breakthrough rather than the cloning of bodies, then what would be something in culture that we could determine that was indicative of cloning ESP? Because ESP basically is something that, if we think of action at a distance or people having effects within each other that are not visible so far, not conscionably recognized as a continuous connected sequence leading from one thing to another. So in late 19th century, an art critic named Wolflin, inheriting studies by Jacob Burckhardt, influenced the art world by coining a phrase or an interpretation of sculpture as enhancing the haptic or tactile dimension. After him comes Bernard Berenson, discussing the tactile values of the eye, and then after him is Siegfried Giedion, and in the middle of it all, James Joyce a close friend of Peggy Guggenheim, who was very influenced by Berenson's tactile values, and Siegfried Gideon was a close friend of James Joyce. All these came together with Joyce taking on the insights of Eliot, Pound, Lewis, and Yates, brought it together, and figured out that tactility was extended by the electric environment, from the telegraph on. The tactility is defined as the resonant interval, which is in between things, not the contact. That's the kinetic effect of touching. The interval of the ability to hold and then let go is tactility. Now, I have it in the feet to walk and move. I have it in the hands, and that is a miming of the brain's ability. So Joyce realized the central nervous system and the interplay between that and the skin would be considered in art criticism as tactile, but he saw it happening in the larger environments, not just in sculpture, painting, and those values of modernism. So I define cloning ESP as a reflection of the discovery of the tactile nature of electric communications. Now, electric communications go inside us and around us. When you're on the telephone, you're inside the central nervous system of somebody, and they're inside you. You're also, if you don't get too specific and use biology, you're also interacting with the skin. So somewhere in the continuum of the body is the situation where you're resonating inside and on the surface of a person on the telephone. Now it's magnified more with the radio, magnified more with the television, and then you get an interesting point. When television arrives as an environment in the 50s, you have a situation where the highest form of awareness, where the TV camera is looking and registering data, and you see the data, the pictures, the movies, whatever, the talk. That situation is being observed, though you may not focus on it too much, by a camera that is using non-judgmental awareness and X-raying, activating the tactile awareness in yourself, the intuitive level, is activating and X-raying the content. Person, usually if it's a live show it's better, but it does X-ray people even in retrospect movie images. So that X-ray is a form of ESP, and it's a form of perception that if you ever take LSD or drugs that offer some kind of clarity, psychedelics, temporary induced clarity, that sense of cold, hard, and yet intuitive perception is actually what the TV screen provides. So we dump the television screen with this psychedelic effect on populations all over the world, and so you had this camera that was X-raying but not judging. So that means we had arrived at collective consciousness. All the media up to that point were unconscious in their effects, but we don't have a consciousness that the TV screen is doing that. Nam June Paik in the 60s would show how a TV monitor and a camera interacting would create psychedelic effects. He was trying to show you how the form was doing something, miming an interaction between people and their sensitivity, what is normal conscious awareness. So we had extended collectively conscious awareness. Then comes the computer environment and the satellite. Now what's interesting about the satellite is that's a 1957 Sputnik. That's where a technology goes out and floats around the planet. Subconsciously, individuals and cultures would think that they were outside of the matrix, the media matrix of TV, radio, magazines, newspapers, and back, books, bulldozers, buildings, and cities. All those structures which were quite dominant by 1960, or had been dominant by 1960, once a satellite comes up, and then there's a building of that satellite environment, the psyche of individuals and cultures would feel that they had a release from that claustrophobic electric implosion and were able to float around. So that may explain why individualism in cultural anarchy, from Mao's China to the United States to Europe and different cultural forms, is a response to the liberating or liberatory effect of the satellite that creates the illusion of floating beyond the media matrix. Now I say that's the end of the technological evolution. By 1960, secretly, what has been lurking there and is going to move in and become conscious and show the cloned ESP. Actually, the technology coming alive. I call that the Android meme. Android meme. The Android meme is secretly being built by humans as they built their own technological history. It arrives in 1960 with the satellite. You have the cultures and individuals swimming about in the 60s and 70s, feeling that they have a release from all kinds of norms and society pressures. But unbeknownst, the hidden agenda of technology was to actually come alive, separate out from the history of technological evolution as created by humans, and then replay all these stages that we had gone through rapidly. So from 1960 to 1990, you had the building of the Android meme. Now, we eventually called it the chip economy or the digital space. Now, what's interesting about this little node is that it is beginning to orchestrate behind the scenes as the satellite creates the interplay as content of all the media in the 60s. If you look at all those media affecting people and each other, you actually have a hologram created around, that people are living in. It's not a hologram as maybe Salvador Dali would present in 1973, a little apparatus. It's actually the effects of a hologram before we actually see a hologram. So this hologramic effect is what people are living inside of in the 60s, with the satellite as a nodal point. Now, we can call that virtual reality. But behind the scenes, somehow, magically or whatever, technology was coming alive and was going to shrink that hologram, miniaturize it, and if you think of homeopathy where things dilute and get tinier and tinier, the hologramic general mixed media environment of the 60s was shrinking, until by the 90s you have a kid with a little laptop and has all these previous media that humans slaved under for centuries, all condensed into this little hologram, and she's outside of it. It's contained within. Now that's actually a replay of the unconscious of humans in the 60s when they're floating around the planet under the satellite effect. So to review, we begin with speech and body language all the way up to the satellite. Humans have created environments, now they're kind of feeling free from it. And then underneath it is a situation where technology is coming alive, and actually television, since it's an extension of the highest decibels of consciousness, you could consider that alive. But I'm changing it. What I mean by technology coming alive is that it gradually disappears, so that by 1990, a young person has a computer, it's getting smaller and smaller until it's a Palm Pilot. All that historical huge media forces are shrinking, and it's disappearing. So technology coming alive could be seen as technology disappearing, but it isn't. It's coming alive. So you have this hologramic effect. It gets tinier and tinier. So I put the term hologram with homeopathy. You merge them, and you got holiopathy, or holiopathic, a holiopathic environment. So the Android meme is a holiopathic environment that's replaying technology and is saying, in the end, by now, that the future will wear your face, it's all about you, and you're free from media sources and media determinism and media environments. That is the situation where the Android meme disappears and pretends that you have autonomy, individually and collectively. So this sensation starts in 1990. So the Android meme has been shrinking from 60 to 90. We call it the digital revolution. It comes alive, which really means it disappears. It's not visible, and then it is allowing humans to think that they have control of the situation. Now, humans know that isn't the situation completely, or different cultures don't, or they feel it isn't, and then that's where you get the baggage from previous cultural interpretations and definitions of your situation that confuse the communication of this present situation. If I say technology is alive, well, they made a movie called They Lived 10, 15 years ago. Does that communicate it? Wearing sunglasses and seeing through and a situation where the aliens dominate? No, but it does communicate 1/5 of the situation, the astrobody situation. Now, I'm including the fact that we survive death, or we have subtle bodies. I don't know what happens after you die, but you have these subtle bodies, so that the Android meme is able to disappear and actually extend the subtle bodies. So I call that the astrobody. That's 1/5 the Android meme. So we've got Pam Anderson there. Is she the Android meme? Is she a human being? Well, the journalists say she's 1/5 chip, 1/5 neuron, 1/5 astrobody, 1/5 screen, and 1/5 human scale, or human archetype. They don't seem to see that. They're admitting the Android meme is here, but we could say that that situation is that they can be cynical about it. They can describe it consciously. Now that's the final stage of the android meme, where it disappears and props up what I call the anthropomorphic physical, the retrieval of the body and its human scale situation where people can relate one-on-one in all media, and they can relate one to many, many to many, and many to one. So that is a pretty interesting, diverse situation for communication. So I now have another term for you, AP, the anthropomorphic physical. The anthropomorphic physical is, in the 90s, what human beings feel is happening as the AM, the android meme, disappears. So, any questions at this point? I mean, we can clarify it if there's a need to. Yes? Right. 18, you mean about 10 minutes ago? Okay. No, it's good you bring this up because it reminds me of other things. I was describing the cloning of ESP, the secret project of technology to create the android meme. Cloning not only of bodies, but the cloning of ESP. When the satellite and the computer effect happens, giving the illusion of autonomy in the 60s, you have the beginning of what I call voluntary ESP, the ability to shut down and remove yourself from the collective ESP, which is a fact from the telegraph on, because there's an imploded effect under the central nervous system extension of television and telegraph to television through telephone and radio. The voluntary ESP aspect actually is a way of describing the disappearance of the android meme, which is the cloned ESP situation since the telegraph and the photograph, what we call virtuality. The voluntary ESP aspect is the AP's ability to remove itself from the media determinism, the media forces, which were very powerful over the last 150 years electrically. You can do an inventory of the arts, sciences, and politics of each area and the medium and see the common characteristics. A simple example is that if you take the newspaper environment of the turn of the century, the collage of items from Peru to China, and then with photographs from different parts of the world and different points of view, all on one page, which in other words is creating a collage of many book pages. What comes in at that point? Cubism. So actually it's a miming of the newspaper page. At the same time, in comes Max Planck with the beginning of quantum physics, and also Freud's discovery of the dream. The collage, or the dream's effects on our conscious life, the collage of the newspaper represents the dreamscape in a primitive level. So that's an example. You can work your way through each medium, radio, movies, and see the changes that happen in the cultures, especially in the West, and their categories and how they mutate and new revolutions in art, science, and politics happen. Now, the voluntary ESP aspect, you don't really have that when the computer and satellite occur in the 50s and 60s, but you do have the sense that you can cut yourself off from these huge media forces. The voluntary ESP comes in with the anthropomorphic physical in the 90s with the laptop and miniaturization, or the holiopathizing of the android meme. Because that, I can interact on any media, and I can flame people, I can interact sympathetically, I can do all kinds of things. I can communicate using my 5 parts, my chip, my neuron, my astral body, my screen, and my human scale. So if you think of the ability to block collective perception as voluntary ESP, that's another way to refer to the anthropomorphic physical reestablishing its autonomy. So you got an incredible situation here where you got AP is supported by the media and the android meme, and at the same time the android meme is a technological environment that affects Wall Street and the world business to the point that they will give money away to you, which they did in the 90s, give you millions for inventing some new program, because money is so lost as a controlling factor, it has to glom on and offer itself to anybody. Now this was bizarre for most people's understanding of economics. And that's what the 90s was. It was all older media doing Baroque spirals of sacrifice and donation of itself to create a situation where the little kid get on Jerry Springer and email and spit in the media face and do whatever it wanted to do, or not even pay attention to Jerry Springer. Jerry Springer is a good sample of how that was the population in the AP working through the AM and having no interest in appealing or being persuaded or to have a sense of success with the AM, and just to spit on the media. So you can see in the popular culture, from Pamela through Jerry Springer to the retrievals of McLuhan, LaRouche, William Irwin Thompson, and Terence McKenna, Tim Lear, anything, all of this Baroque spiral of images of autonomy and Menippean satire riddled the culture. And then it collapsed. Did it? I don't know. But it seems to have created an image of collapsing. And then George Bush shows up. What's George Bush? He's a guy who doesn't watch TV, doesn't have a TV, doesn't communicate properly through the media. He kind of insults it with his bad grammar, which is the imagery we're getting through the leftovers of the Android meme. But he's popular in Middle America on the mythical pollster levels. I call them the pollster guys. He's popular because he is independent of the media. And the media in New York, living in New York, you see this, they panicked the last 6 months because he wouldn't give them any content. And it wasn't until that senator defected that they thought they had content. But the point is, Bush represented the AP, the anthropomorphic physical, the one not involved in media. His image was not to be concerned about the polls and to speak one-on-one with people. The reason he's the only one who's able to do this, there is a historical baggage that goes through the oligarchic banking system that allows people to be important in the CIA at certain levels that then makes you a candidate to get in. So you have to be part of intelligence agencies to work on that level in politics, like Gorbachev was KGB, so George Bush, CIA director. So his son is the best image that they can come up with to spit in the image. So George Bush represented the anthropomorphic physical overcoming of the Android mean. Who's the Android mean? Obviously Mr. Gore and Bill Clinton. Very savvy. They replay the history of the Android mean with their great media bullshit of the 60s, of the 90s upside down, and that's what's called Slick Willie and all this kind of stuff that he is apparently really good. But what's interesting is about Clinton is that he was a replay of the 5 parts if you think of the 5 decades. He was a replay of Eisenhower in his golfing and indifference. He was a replay of Reagan in the Teflon effect that nobody could get to in the scandals. He was a replay of Nixon because he got Watergated and impeached. He was a replay of Jimmy Carter as a Southern politician. And who did I leave out? And JFK, of course. So he had all the decades. So the Android meme, which from 1960 to 90 is really replaying the history of media, has its after image and life in the 90s, and Clinton was the perfect president because he replayed the whole Android meme. Now note, Android meme, if I call it AM, that's America. AM is right in there. It's also a reverse of Madison Avenue. So you got Madison Avenue, then the Android meme is MA reversed, all right? So then Clinton and Gore, after 1998, when the AP nailed Clinton through the Lewinsky gate, Gore comes on totally unable to use his media savvy. He cannot communicate beyond that for some reason. He cannot get out of it because all he can do is represent the AM, so he loses to the AP. So we now have the AP, and we're still in this international software heaven or hell, depending on where you are at the time, which is always changing. What is the breakthrough from that? Next question. Okay. Duncan. Nothing? Okay. Okay, so we continue. If you look at the 20th century and how, if you understand the electric environment is an extension of the tactile sense, which is not any one sense, it's the interplay of all the senses. Or some people say it's the coherency generator in the brain, or in the body, in the heart, wherever it is, the coherency generation. The coherency generation is caused by a tactile medium, and so therefore it cannot be any particular sense. It has to coordinate the different 5 senses and interplay them to create coherent consciousness. Now, what's interesting, in the 20th century, you have certain figures at certain phases. So in the radio era, we could say the movie era is Russia. The radio era is Germany and the Middle East. And the 60s is the China era and the Japanese popularity. Now, these are effects on the West, because the West is getting these technologies. These technologies are affecting other cultures, but they're getting the ricochet effect. So in each culture, you have a sense of total comprehensive awareness, a sense of gestalt, of understanding or feeling and control of all. We call that plenary awareness. Now, plenary awareness is tactile. So if you look at every major culture of the 20th century, Russia, it has a phrase that gives a sense of total mastery of the situation. In Russia, it is, I know it like the palm of my hand. Now that's the sensory bias in that sense of plenary awareness. Every culture's plenary awareness expression contains a bias that indicates the cultural preference. So I'm going to say that every culture I mention has a tactile bias. The Russians have the bias indicating the phrase, I know it like the palm of my hand, iconic, tactile. Now, the Spanish have a phrase, I know it as if I'd given birth to it. So their bias is tactile proprioceptive. The Germans have a bias, a phrase of complete mastery that indicates a bias. That phrase is, I know it like the inside of my pocket. Okay? And that is tactile interface. Now, it's interesting that Germany rises in the 90s under the reunited Germany has a pretty big impact in the East and West and in taking over internet companies the last few years. So if the internet is tactile interface, they're the country that surfaces a figure of resonance with that effect. And so it's in their sense of mastery. I know it. What did I say? It's in my pocket. Now think of your head as a pocket. If you know it inside, you can do it by extending through electric media, so you actually extend your skull pocket and you're inside it. So that's electric technology right there, especially with the screen. The next culture was Japan, popular in the 70s and 80s, and a prominent figure in economics. Their phrase for mastery and plenary awareness is, I know it from head to toe. Now, head to toe is the tactile interface. So they have a tactile bias. Now, Americans, they dominate in industrial ways, political ways. What is their phrase? Their phrase is, I know it inside out. That's the American sense of expressing of mastery of a situation. Now, is there a tactile bias in there? Not necessarily. It is actually the bias of kinetic manipulatory. Now, kinetic is not strictly linear visual space, and it involves invisible modality, so it's not totally tactile. But I think it's interesting that America, as the cop of the world, has this phrase which indicates kinetic manipulatory bias, and that's a situation where they walk around and operate in the movement level of sensory and cultural domination. So what I have here is Germany, America, Spain, Japan, and Russia. Now, there's another culture, Britain. Supposedly Britain had a big effect in the swinging 60s, out of London with the Beatles and Twiggy and that. So what's their phrase? This should be familiar to a lot of people here, Canadians. Their phrase for mastery is, I know it like the back of my hand. Actually, I may have got that wrong. Does anybody remember? Does anybody remember which one is this? I know it like the back of my hand, and the other culture, I know it like the palm of my hand. Which one is English or British? Ah, okay, so I got it right. All right. When you're working with tactile concepts, you kind of get it backwards a lot because that's a visual polarity that creates you're trying to work past. So often James Joyce will merge his polarities to indicate tactility. So when you replay this verbally, you end up getting things backwards. But I've done it for a while, so maybe I didn't get it backwards. So the point is that the Russians say, and I can't remember, what did I say? It was the back. That's British? Okay. So I'm going to have to start asking myself questions to get out of this. And so the Russians don't like the palm. So the palm is iconic interface. The back of my hand is British. That's linear. You can see the 5 strings and the separate functions. It's more holistic when you have the iconic palm. And then the Japanese head to toe. The Spanish proprioceptive, out of the gut. Think of Cubism and Braque and Picasso and the Spanish artists having a bit of effect in the teens and 20s. So certain figures rise out of cultures that match the biases of certain media that come in.
What are Canadians?
The Canadians are exactly appropriate for today. The Canadians are the only culture that has multi-border lines. They interact. You have the English Canada in relation to French Canada, and then you have Russian border, American border, the Eskimo border, or now the Inuit, and then you have the Native Americans. So you got a multi-border situation. Canada is a quadrophenic country I haven't explained quadrophenia yet, have I? No. Okay, so this is important. Quadrophenia per se is the 5 parts of yourself and being extended through these media, the chip, the neuron, the screen, the archetype, and the astral body. As we get more in the 90s, overcoming the AM, and we have a sense of autonomy as the AP, the anthropomorphic physical, and I call it anthropomorphic physical, is that human beings think they're human beings regardless of what other environments are impinging on them, and they project certain images within their culture, their language, and media of what that anthropomorphic body is made up of. And it's always changing through history and changing through now. So in medicine, people don't know what their bodies are made up of, whether they're drugs or chi or oriental energies or this and that, and they have this mixture of cultures coming into their body percept. So working that out is the anthropomorphic physical. The anthropomorphic physical today is quadrophenic. Now that's because humans are essentially in consciousness double, which is the fact that you always, when you think of something or are aware of things, you're always aware that you're aware of it. So your awareness is always slipping through and out of the initial awareness. So humans are doubleness, and then the android meme comes along and recreates that in the clone DSP technological macro meme level, and it eventually is going to simulate the human form and be double itself. So as the android meme disappears inside us, the anthropomorphic physical, as its original first nature means the body's created by I don't know who, but not us. The second nature is the technology that humans make. So in first nature we have doubleness. As the android meme disappears and the AP takes over, the doubleness of first nature is imitated by doubleness of the technology in the android meme. So we have 2 doublenesses inside us. So that means we're schizophrenic squared or quadrophenic. Now as the android meme disappears in the 90s, the anthropomorphic physical has a sense of more autonomy, increasingly, up till now, and therefore it's going to play with its quadrophenia a little more casually because it's removing itself, getting independent as an effect of the android meme shrinking. It's removing itself from the schizophrenia and the doubleness of the android meme. It is getting more playful and detached from the quadrophenia. Okay? So Canada right now is the country that could properly communicate to all the cultures as they go through their quadrophenic responses individually and collectively with their sensory biases, because it is the original quadrophenic culture, because it is interacting with so many borderlines. Nobody else has done so many different cultural time zones. And also because it interacts the most intimately with the American technological dynamo, and therefore it's the most familiar. And if you think of America as the android meme, which is creating technological phases that will be spread out over the planet, then Canada is the first contender, the first experiencer of that situation. So what is the bias of Canada then? I would say that the Canadian phrase, even though I don't think Canadians created it, but I think what Canadians are all about is, their phrase is, it's all about you. Okay? Because that's what the AP is going to come along with as the AM disappears. It's going to create a situation where every culture and every individual will have the future wearing its own face. So the user is the content. So, therefore, it's all about you. Now, I don't know. I haven't been in Canada for 8 years. So, the phrase, it's all about you, where did you people ever hear that as a complaint? For example, American anti-Clinton broadcasters don't like Clinton, or didn't like him, because everything was all about him. Had any Canadian media comment on that meme? On that idea?
This Rick Mercer in this hour has 2
Yeah.
minutes does Talking with Americans, which is basically he's saying it's all about you.
Yeah, that's right. I actually saw that a few months ago for the first time. Now he is satirizing the information environment. Now that's another level of this. The cloning of ESP means that you're determined. You are limited to having to deal with information. You're controlled by the news, the whole world. Once the telegraph came in, and then the movie, telephone, radio. News ran the situation. Big Brother no longer was based on, Orwellian behind the scenes military or hit squads, which were still there for other countries and a little behind-the-scenes police actions. But the world was taken over by the poltergeist, or the word that makes the market, the idea that the polls determine what you're doing. And the polls were a reflection of the news, and the news reflected what the people thought they were interested in. So it was all imploded. That is, that's the AM replays, the control by the information society. Actually, just when Wired magazine and the internet economy takes off in '93, they're saying now, for you and everybody, it's an information society, an information economy. That's a fact. Well, if it's being marketed, then you know it's obsolete. So that's another sign that the anthropomorphic physical was moving up and swallowing the android meme, and information was not controlling people anymore, represented by the satirical reactions on shows like Jerry Springer and just the internet culture that all levels, all ages work in. So Rick Mercer comes along, and he makes fun of people being informed. But you're right, he picks the right country, and the Americans go along with it. I watched it. I couldn't decide whether some of the Americans were just going along or others were totally duped. Some mayors he interviewed seemed to go along with the joke. Others didn't know what was happening. The point is, in the confusion between the AP and the AM, his show actually expresses the fragility of the information exchange. And also the fact that people don't care what the informational content pattern is they're commenting on and will say anything. All right? So does that make sense? Does that explain, Rick? I am Canadian?
Yeah, most of the I am Canadian.
Yeah, in this video I got of a Rick Mercer show, they showed, I saw those ads, but I only watched it once. What did they just sort of said, I'm a Canadian.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does it seem to you? What is the point of it? I mean, what is the distinguishing feature of it?
Insecurity.
All right, that's the hidden ground.
The individual, you know.
It's the individual. So, so if it's insecurity, then it's a form of satire.
No, I don't think it is insecurity. I think it's them saying, listen, Dad, get it straight. I'm not American, okay?
Now what other cultures don't have that?
I mean, it's stemming from insecurity.
I think they're trying to foster a sense of Canadian identity through the life of fear.
Right. No, but look, see, there's the AP speaking. I mean, the point is, it's all information is done playfully. So, I am a Canadian is a form of Manipian satire. Now, Manipian satire is a rare, not well-known satire because most people were trained in education the last 100 years that satire was either making fun of public figures or vices. But Manipian satire, which Finnegan's Wake is a model of, is satirizing the audience of your medium. Okay, so Woody Allen, when he would turn to the audience and say something, he'd step out of the movie and make some ironic comment to the audience. That's an example of Manipian satire. So Manipian satire is the audience, is the entertainment, the actor, the artist, satirizing the audience. All right. As the super audience implodes on itself and works for itself under electronic conditions the last 40 years, then we're getting to the point where the AP can satirize the AM. So to say I am a Canadian is a Manipian gesture, because the Canadians know they don't exist. They know that they're up against an empire that doesn't exist. And so just to bug them, you pretend you're a Canadian.
But don't forget, this ad is selling beer. That's what it's all about.
Well,
Selling beer.
that's liquid capital.
That's liquid capital.
Now that's an interesting...
Aside from insecure, feeling Canadian, feeling racist, they're selling beer. That's what it's all about.
Well, that's the Android meme. A simple expression of the last 150 years of cloning ESP is that eventually people realized that the machines were running the show and they were working for them. And that was a crude metaphor, that we're working for the machines, because secretly the machines were going to disappear and make you feel that you're working for yourself and not the machines anymore. But the fact is that the media is feeding on each other, and as you say, it's a product. And the product is a mythic stage, an identity. Beer is a complex that represents all kinds of values and industries that go into it, and it's then projected as a pattern information or an image that people can be. So I would say it's not about beer. It's an agreement by the AP to replay Madison Avenue, MA, as AM, Android meme, and pretend it's all about beer. See, but it's run its course. it's run its course. They couldn't have an election last year in the States because people were so removed and floating around in the 5 parts that they couldn't even show up. So they had to bring in the CIA to run the election. They had to sabotage it and cancel it and all these other Big Brother operations. And the guy who won didn't even care that he was president and didn't even care how he communicated to you. So he was saying it was all about the United States and American identity and screw China, and he's doing it with a wink, a Menippean satire. There's no way they're going to untangle themselves from China or Russia or anybody, because we all implode into one little node, which is rapidly disappearing. And that node consists of a neuron, a screen, and what I mean by screen is like, that was the old television age of the 50s, but then it gets inside the computer matrix. But the screen is still there, and it's in different media. But the ratios are, now this is an interesting paradigm, if you think of the screen and the chip as the individual in the invisible technology behind the screen that's moving the imagery through all the different channels. So you have screen and the chip. Now that's the Android meme, that's second nature. First nature is the neuron, which is a parallel to the screen, and the astrobody, the thing that's invisible yet influencing things, or the etheric energies. The astrobody is the invisible part of the first nature. So in first nature, the astrobody is to the neuron, as in second nature, or technology in the Android meme, the chip is to the screen. Now I say neuron, not your skin. See, why would I say that the physical body is represented by the neuron? Because the neuron is a historical, biological concatenation of imagery from science and chemistry of the 19th century. And yet, we can now see that the neuron is made up of all kinds of subatomic stuff and things that new instruments can measure more subtly. I mean, they eventually find the neutrino. So a neuron is the last vestige of the old biology that we were given that was consideredly programmed by Darwin and those evolutionary theories. Now, another reason you say neuron, and this is a science, I think these terms should be taught in school. I mean, this is to define what we are. I will now get into the other 5 in a second. The neuron is the fact that when you're in this electric environment from the telephone on, or even the telegraph, we're inside our central nervous system. All right? That's really what we've been. That is why in medicine, starting in the 20s, I mean, it was Claude Bernard who discovered the phrase the interior landscape, and chemistry started looking at the internal nervous system and devising chemical processes in there. That interior landscape is now such a small part of us that most people will accept chemical bombardment of it over the last 30 years especially. Antibiotics, blah, blah, blah. All this going to doctors and getting prescriptions that are immediately accepted and distributed immediately. There's not much interaction over what it is. New drugs come on the market and they're given. Because most people subconsciously know that's only 1/5 of themselves, the neuron. So why not bomb it with drugs? You got to deal with the chip part of yourself, which is answering your email all the time, or your answer machine, or looking at what you recorded. You got to deal with your astrobody, which is increasing fragmentation in people's imagery of what the universe is, so they think they've been abducted, they think that they are channeling, they're thinking of this, that, they're not thinking in terms of little body in one dimension. So that's another weird effect of the situation. So we call it the astrobody. And then you're also dealing with the TV screen, which is the news. In other words, you go to your email and 1/5 of yourself goes all over in anthropomorphic physical autonomy, but the other time you got to check out the other 1/5 of yourself to see what the news is, to see if you got a job or not, or something like that, right? Which means working for the beer companies. So these 5 parts are what we're made up of in terms of the old bodies. Now the other 5 parts are the collective social space, the situation that we're made up of. Okay, shared knowledge. The philosophical term for that, for community knowledge, is epistemology. So ontology is a sense of your own being. Epistemology is what the community shares, what they think knowledge is and what is relevant as knowledge. So the 5 parallel processes to the ontological situation, in other words, the 5 epistemological situations are, we're 1/5 NASA, which is a moon program, which represents industrial technology that ain't going to stop. They're going to keep building it. 1/5 CIA, which is information monitoring and profiling and making sure that certain images keep the beer going. And it's only 1/5 the situation in social space. And as a result of it only being 1/5, everybody is cynical about whatever they're functioning in because they know it's only 1/5 of their public self. So the second one was CIA. The third part of our social self is the X-Files. Now, I don't mean the program, but that's a marketing of the image. X-Files is a parallel to the astral body of the ontological level, because the X-Files are people having experiences and trying to understand their community in terms that can't measure the effects of all these new media and the effects of the android disappearing. So we call that the X-Files. That's the registering of things. That's actually why people read newspapers, to find out what human being drowned their kids and then claimed they were innocent of it, and then the husband said, I forgive you. These kind of things is X-Files. It's sort of, we're moving into socially anarchistic behavior that is the accumulation of these new technological situations that are strange for most traditional cultural paradigms. So the fourth level is the X-Files, and the fifth is genetic engineering. All right? The human scale is going to be taken over by bodies. So you parallel the chip, is 1/5 chip ontology is related to 1/5 epistemological level, which is genetic engineering. The TV screen is private versus the public CIA domain. X-Files is an epistemological parallel of the astral body, and the neuron is 1/5 of our ontological situation, paralleled by the community level of, anybody remember? NASA? NASA. That's the old, you see, the amazing thing about the moon shots in '69 was that everybody went to the moon with the astronauts, and the moon came to everybody's living room. Technologically, you were there, electrically. So the old idea of putting you inside a vehicle and sending you someplace, that's the legacy of industrial hardware before it was really discarnate and electronic. And that situation is going to continue as 1/5 ourselves. And then the other 1/5 was the archetype, which is sort of like the anthropomorphic physical, the sense of being human. The parallel to that is human community. So we have here tonight 1/5 of ourselves satisfied by this small community environment, which apparently, I've talked to Norman, the community keeps the church going and they offer all kinds of functions. But just think of the community. This community has to deal with, it did have to deal with drug dealers all over the place. Now, where did all that come from? That came from kids growing up within the TV screen world, and then in the chip world, which maybe had a different effect in the 90s, but basically TV screen. You have this little community had to deal with another 1/5 followed from another part of social space, which was the TV screen. And at the same time, they had to deal with the X-Files effects and the CIA files, a CIA effect. So you see the confusion of public and private spaces, or ontology and epistemology, leads to a situation where the only accurate text that you can look at that describes it is Finnegan's Wake. You can't read Finnegan's Wake linearly or you can't read Finnegan's Wake. So what is it translating? Well, you can't read today. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Not likely. But I am describing precisely and with the most advanced awareness of what's going on, and I'm using Finnegan's Wake, and I'm probably sounding quite clear for a few seconds, and then it doesn't connect. Just like Finnegan's Wake. You read a few lines, little aphorism, nice, and then it falls apart when it's juxtaposed with another sentence. So Finneganese is what we're all becoming. And Canada is the quadrophenic culture that is probably miming that, because Canada was a country that never had an identity. In simple terms, it was a colony, it became a nation, then became a colony again. And it never had a wrenching civil war, national bloodbath to create a strong identity, which makes it relevant in the 60s and 70s as a mediator and peacekeeper and working in the interval between all the highly defined cultures during the Cold War. But since the android meme and Canada is a product of the railway and the newspaper, that's a technological fact. That artifact cannot survive as the AP takes over and diminishes the AM, so Canada's role as a model of quadrophenia is obsolete. Because the AP means you, it wears your face, you, the individual. So we all know that government bureaucracies have no influence, and G7 even comes to Halifax to run the world for 5 minutes, right? There must be an interesting statement, not a question now. Any statements?
So that's why the government's all falling apart, or everybody feels...
No, I would say they fell apart in the 30s under radio conditions. And then this collective mania took over, fascism, isolationism, socialism, communism. It was a imploded international situation after World War II. So no government. So what do? They prop up the myth of industrial hardware, we'll call that NASA, America races against Russia, or the Soviet Union, that is a hologram, a certain historical image or thread propped up after World War II as part of the 5 parts. You see what I'm saying? So there is no government to fall apart, yet there is a hologram of it, and anybody who interacts with it knows that all these 5 levels I'm talking about apply to it. The government doesn't care about you, but it does serve you on the human scale. You see what I'm saying? So you can't say what disappeared and what reappeared. Not any one institution. But what the amazing thing is that if you look at our original point as human beings, as cavemen, Paleolithic situation, and where there's little groups or maybe even individuals that are sitting there in a, quote, Garden of Eden. Now they're going to unfold a history of technology that will create a situation where they are merged into a technological implosion that has no human scale. Well, that's 1960. Secretly, technology is going to come alive and work its way back to the Garden of Eden so that one of these days, in the next 30 years, you're going to be confronted with a cloned replica of yourself, which came from the technological source, okay? Second nature. So first nature, humans create second nature technology and create this arc that leads to this amazing imploded discarnate android meme AP interface. And then the android meme is going to come back and it's I don't know where you could say the android meme began in terms of this arc. I mean, it's an illusion, the idea is a beginning and moving. But let's say that evolution is true, Darwinian evolution, and we did come from the apes. And then we created technologies. So we arrive in this new technological simulacrum in the 1980s. Just on the other side, we're going to meet a human being that's a clone of us, of you in particular. That came out of technology, which humans were constantly building on the side. And so it comes around, and you confront a human being that's a clone of yourself, and that is a human artifact that is technologically free. It's the way Paleolithic was in the beginning. It's a human being free of technology. But it's a technological creation, and we meet that. So that's the question of what our identity is in relation to technology. They merge, but technology will pop out of you. So we began as a human being, we turn into something else, and then at the point where we turn into something else, we meet ourselves. Doesn't that have a kind of interesting symmetry to it? No? I don't.
So why?
Who said what?
I said why. I said, what's this, song? What's it all about?
It's all about you. See, what? Yeah, if you're a Canadian and quadrophenic and have given up your Canadian identity. And so it's all about you, and you has no boundaries, yet there's going to be an artifact that shows up that is an exact replica of you. So it isn't about you, is it? Now, my solution for this, we'll call all this situation I'm describing as the results of a software hell. That technology is imploding, disappearing, creating the illusion that you're autonomous, and yet you don't really feel it, and it doesn't seem to create this sense of slack or relaxation that technology promised. All that situation is a software hell. The situation that might break us out of that is actually the fusion of first and second nature. First nature being the sun, the energy, the immortal energy of the sun in the universe, meeting the immortal energy of second nature. The immortal nature, which is technology, the immortal artifactual second nature technology is what was called 10 years ago cold fusion, now called zero-point energy. What actually you have with zero-point energy is the fusion of first and second nature, where technology invented by humans actually has immortality. More energy comes out than goes in. So this cold fusion zero-point energy potential, which is, according to many scientists outside of the United States, is a fact. Matsushita invests in it, and there's all kinds of information outside the United States about the practicality of cold fusion. Now, it makes sense when you think that the software hell flips into new hardware. So we've been moving, that's what I guess what I meant, that the human being started in the Garden of Eden and moved toward a state of software, or a discarnate heaven on earth where you're a resonating spirit informationally. So, so we start as an animal on the ground and we go into the air. But the way to get out of the technological air is to flip back into on the ground again, and that would only be possible with cold fusion energy, where you would actually have a situation where people could have free energy to the point that they wouldn't need to renew the battery less than every 10 years. Now, the people that are going to market this cold fusion will make $1 trillion, the biggest bonanza ever happened. Might be Matsushita, who knows? It'll happen in other countries first, not in the United States, North America, because it's too invested technologically and culturally in the older oil consciousness. So it shows up, and people have said, well, if that happens, they're going to make huge money, and people have these gadgets that will be going around polluting the world, and with their new cold fusion things. There's a scene in Back to the Future, 10, 15 years ago, of people flying through sky lanes, just above the ground. Well, maybe that caused all kind of pollution is the worry. But if you project it further, once somebody made a big cash bonanza, they're dealing with a population that's using energy that only has to pay bills once every 10 years, or a little bit. So actually the control of money diminishes because people don't have to use it as much, or have to pay into it as much, because the energy doesn't go out. It's like I'll give you $1 quadrillion and I'll never have to pay you again. And that's over stages, let's say for 30 years. At that point, people have free energy, and then they can form any kind of cultural colony, interface. They could grow vegetables, whatever it is in other levels of culture they can bring in, because they've got the basic needs that humans never had solved: heat, food, and energy and warmth. That situation has been satisfied. So that would be the breakthrough. So the most interesting battle right now is the software Android meme is propping up the anthropomorphic physical with the software hell as the underpinning, and denying that there is a real hardware post-Android meme situation of free energy. So that's something that one should look into and promote. Because it does, you follow the logic that you could, these guys these people make all the money from selling the cold fusion. So they could strut around for 20 years as the richest people, or whatever, what kind of hell they're going to create, I don't know. But the situation is at a certain point, people don't need to pay as much. And then they can really decentralize. The problem with decentralization under the software conditions, which we have in lifestyle choices now, the problem with that is you're still hooked into money, and you have to pay rent. The purse strings of rent control disappear when the free energy creates what I call a frictionless society. Whereas all the time before then, you always needed heat, food, and shelter and warmth. That creates friction because there's not enough to go around, so it was entropic. When you get to negentropic, more energy created than was before, which cold fusion brings in, then you don't have the raw needs of instinctual friction. Now, I'm not saying that's an ideal state. I'm saying that for the first time in thousands of years, humanity would not have to pay the rent as continuously as they did previously in the friction base. So that is actually a big breakthrough. And it makes sense that the Android meme and technology is a metaphor, a simulation, and yet right now the internet economy, until it supposedly collapsed, offered perpetual motion, endless money, endless wealth, endless jobs. It was actually offering an image of frictionless situation, of more money coming out than going in, more energy coming out than going in. But it was an illusion, because we have to break into the cold fusion new hardware situation. So that's the thought, that's the soundbite, and as long as we're in the software hell, it has no staying power. What I just said has no staying power until we actually have the cold fusion environment.
But if I understand it correctly, that sounds to me like the old alchemist was looking for gold.
Yeah. Yes.
Like selling your soul to the devil to have eternal life.
Why? It sounds like that. But so what? If it sounds like that, doesn't mean it is.
Well, I was wondering what your comment was.
Well, in my situation, as long as we have the software hell and we don't break through into free energy, then we are going to have the biblical prophecy of the mark of the beast and the cashless society and a lot of misery. And so the AP anthropomorphic-physical, which is straining to get to the new zone, the alchemical mutation. As long as it doesn't happen, then AP flips into PA, which is the prince of the air, which is the Antichrist, which is the devil, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, we actually are at a point now where we're in a battle between the android meme, the prince of the air, which can be the same thing, and a breakthrough, which is something humans have never known, and I don't think it'll be easy to get to that level. But the point is I don't want to offer an opinion to things, because it's just an opinion. I'm trying to show that the inadequacy of language to describe a situation. And everybody knows that by now. And they know the inadequacy of opinions. But even the scientists are trying to say what's happening. Like the Genome Project. Okay, that's what I said. Okay, the tumblers have fallen. We're in now. Okay, now we're going to make the robbery. The Genome Project is based on the neuron level. It ignores the meme level, the macro meme that Joyce broke through and McLuhan and Carpenter and Thiel put down in concrete terms, and ignores the astral body because we may live more lives than we have, and that may be a factor in the soul. So the devil may be a limited concept, or the devil is the astral plane, which may, you get into Hans Moravec's idea. They want to create a computer matrix that your mind goes into, and you don't die, but it'll rebuild your mind and make a body, and you have a kind of immortality. But that matrix, if it was possible, may block off the ability to reincarnate. Okay? So if the astral body is part of us, that's another factor. I forget what I was just saying just before the astral body. Was I going through the 5 parts again? Oh, yeah, the Genome Project. Okay, so they don't deal with the astral body, and they don't deal with the mimic level, and they only deal with the neuron. And they don't... So, the Genome Project, I think that would be a great Canadian quadrophenic response to the Genome Project, which is the android meme, trying to be the anthropomorphic physical, but they're focusing only on 1/5 of ourselves, the archetype and the neuron. So if we include these other points, so actually Canada can lead the war against the Genome Project with the memon, or whatever you want to call the macro discovery that McLuhan and Thiel and Carpenter made. All right, so the meme point. So there should be a meme project, a human, what do we call it? Meme. Now, I think I heard Dennis Young was here. Okay, Dennis Young, he's an expert on Duchamp, among other things, but Duchamp has an interesting point to make here. If you look at his the large glass, he says even the, what is it, something in their bachelors. What is it, Dennis? So anyways, do you know what the title of the large glass is by Duchamp? Right. Comma, even, which is meme in French. M-E-M-E. So actually even Duchamp, who completed that in 1923, and Joyce was very impressed with Duchamp's works and actually made a dialogue between himself and Duchamp as a key part of the beginning of the book. It's called the Mutt and Jute section. And Mutt was the name that Duchamp put on the fountain at his show in 1917. R. Mutt. So Mutt and Jute, Duchamp and Joyce. Now we have to get into the title, right? Zappa, McLuhan, and Joyce, and I would add Duchamp because Mr. Young is here. So here is this situation where, in 1953, McLuhan discovers what Joyce meant by the meme project, and little 12-year-old Frank Zappa starts to write his ongoing opus called The Return of the Son of Monster Magnet. The monster magnet is a discarnate electronic implosion. And he's saying either he or his image is the return of the sun of the monster magnet. Now he's indicating the AP. He's representing himself as the AP. Now Marshall McLuhan felt that technology was imploding and would reinforce the AP. He interpreted generally that as a rebirth of the Catholic sense of the temple of the flesh, the Christian notion that the body would overcome the discarnate tendencies of the electric media. So as a Catholic, he brings in the anthropomorphic physical aspect, Frank Zappa brings in the anthropomorphic physical as himself, as a creative artist. James Joyce did it with the book. Now, his book was a tactile book with the eye as the final fact that it was a book, but it contained all media. And so Joyce thought that the detachment, which is essential to human cognition and human separateness, which he regards as a value, that human separateness was finally preserved as we imploded into the discarnate state by the medium of a printed book. But the book contained tactilities, and so it wasn't biased into culturally limited notions of I and individuality. It was a new kind of individuality reinforced by the book. So we have McLuhan standing on the shoulders of Joyce. You have Zappa, through his own world, standing on the shoulders of Joyce. McLuhan emphasizing the eye, the tactile eye. Zappa emphasizing the tactile ear. His music is tactility in acoustic space. And then you have Duchamp creating a space which he does secretly, a tant donné down in Philadelphia, where you can only look at it with your eye. Okay, so he preserves the eye after making multimedia arts for many years, the teens up to the 40s. He makes multimedia arts, but in the end, he puts his wager on the eye. Now, what's interesting is that the eye is the only sense that can sort of remove itself from the collective music, mesh, and buzz of social life. So as I go back to the cloning ESP, you saw that the satellite offered the detachment of the eye from the cloned ESP matrix. You look at Zappa, McLuhan, Duchamp, and Joyce, they hoik up the eye as a separate final answer to the Android meme to reinforce the AP, and it's not an eye limited by culture, it's an eye that continues to offer human autonomy and detachment. That situation is how they beat the web, in the sense that as a archetypal reference point for every medium they worked in, the book, the painting, sculpture, and music, every one of them obsolete, and the Android meme was going to be able to simulate it. They make a final statement, an exclamation point, an actual double duty interrobang, which is an exclamation point and a question mark superimposed, on the evolution of the Android meme, and their response to that reinforces the AP. But it's an AP that remains satirical. And that's the human stubbornness that always was there. All the technologies come along, create environments, change people's attitudes, create collective movements, collective impressions, collective cultural biases, but always it's the stubborn human essence is saying, I'm not part of this. So now, the Android meme has to recreate that condition to dupe the human being. So it's now creating a homeopathic, shrinking technological simulacrum that will reinforce the detached human stubbornness, which is the old AP. So that's where we're at today. So you got a bunch of kids, a bunch of adults, and a bunch of in between who are all basically 1-year-old in this situation, and they represent human stubbornness. And the technology is here for you to do that. So the future will wear your face, and you'll beat the web, and that'll be the final seduction unless we move into cold fusion or some kind of removal from that software hell. So, so Pam is a TV star, an internet star, a real woman, a long-lost sweetheart, and an astrobody, but they're not allowed to talk about that. And I guarantee you, I don't know it, but I bet she does Buddhism and Kabbalah studies with the Madonna in Hollywood, studying the astrobody, right? Okay, so we're all doing that, and those are the 5 memes, and the Genome Project is going to try to condense that down into A, B, C, D, E, guanine, cytosine, adenine, and the other base, and try to make it controllable regardless of the fact that RNA is going to mutate it. Now, you want to know where AIDS came from? Yeah. Because that's the retrovirus. In 1969-70, a Pentagon, in quote, scientist, a secret scientist, proposed to the authorities that were responsible for protecting the United States. Now, there were no governments, but there was a government. There was a fake government, but there was a solar government. You know what I mean? It was a mixed bag. So somebody was proposing to somebody else that we might have an enemy that will invent this before we do. So they knew nuclear war was obsolete. So they decided that if we could create a situation where we could have a war, take over the country, not kill the people, have them continue working in the industries, and then have the advantages of that, of the control of that. This is 30 years ago. Have the advantage of control of a local economy and keep the people going. So the idea of a new war was to wipe out geographical resistance to your economic empire without killing the people. So this scientist proposed that he could genetically design a virus that would temporarily weaken the immune system so that the enemy target population would have vulnerability to local diseases. So they came up with this by 1980 and went to Chad and Nigeria and took the smallpox program of vaccination in Africa, which was going on, winding up with success from 76 to 80. They infiltrated that, having decided that you couldn't spray this substance and you couldn't put it in the water. The only way to target would be through sexual exchange, fluids and sexual exchange. So they put the genetically engineered virus in the smallpox solutions as they were being injected into local populations in Chad, Nigeria. And this was the WHO program, World Health Organization. So they infiltrated that. Now, they then watch what happened. So in 1980, after a few months, people are starting to get incredibly extreme immune breakdown so that they got local diseases to the max, and they would rapidly die. So after a while, as it spread in Africa, they realized that the synthetic virus was mutating and affecting the immune system more violently than they planned. But they also were hoping to create a virus that would mutate, become a viral debilitant for, say, 3 weeks, then become benign. Now, they didn't know how long it was going to go, but in this case, they created a situation which was a virus that would go through this malignant and benign phase for 29 years. So that's 1980 to 1909. I mean, 2029. So the situation is that the virus is mutating. They discovered this by 1990. It's going through HIV 2, 3, 4. And people are wondering by 2000 why people survive it so easily. That's because it's moving into the benign phase. Now, this is the ostensible facts of a genetic engineered virus. Now, that's a horror story if most people knew that. There'd be all kinds of class action suits. Now, that is the kind of things the Human Genome Project is going to unleash. No, I don't want to say that. The Human Genome Project will do some good things. I'm saying that the mistakes and focus of economic and research and development on the Human Genome Project will lead to accidents like that, and all the time people will be horrified and communicating within the media matrix, the software matrix, about all this stuff, and science, traditional science, will ignore the mutating effects of the meme and the media on people while working on the human genome. And, it's good. And if the hardware is the solution to that, then even to point out the meme level and point out the determining factors of software shrinkage and miniaturization, even that is mistaking and not noticing the effect of the new hardware, which is cold fusion. Okay, I finished my introduction. Okay. No, I don't need a drink.
It's been said that you are the matrix. Can you explain that?
If you go to my website, or one of the websites, there's a collection of what's called Bob proofs, which are this journalist has been taking what I've been saying on radio shows for 10 or more years and analyzing and noticing how it shows up in the popular media. So I put on a manifesto in '96 that referred to the Morpheus generation as the generation that comes after the baby boomers and Generation X. I called them Morpheus. And I also was known as a black woman on the radio. I always said I was a black woman. So this guy goes and sees the Matrix, and he sees the hero, or the initial hero is Morpheus, and the oracle that they take to and Neo gets involved with is a black woman. So Morpheus and Neo and the black woman are a situation that I spelled out a few years before the movie. When he got in touch with me to wonder why this was happening, he then got the virus, and I don't know where it comes from, where he started seeing me in all kinds of media, in novels, in his mother's favorite TV show. He went, I won't say nuts, but he got lost in the strange synchronicity, which is xenochrony. And so he's been documenting this, and so he's written an article that the Matrix was about me. And if I'm right, then he's right. You know, if I'm accurate in describing what's going on and have the advantage of this inside information about things like AIDS, then all the android meme would imitate me, because it's going to be looking for the anthropomorphic physical. And the AP that is the most aware or most intuitive to what's happening and most aware of it, like Nam June Paik, when he takes a TV monitor and shines it on the TV screen, you get this psychedelic spiral or fractal effect, we call it now, then that'll happen to me as I stare at the android meme. And so the android meme will reflect me more and more, because I'm the closest to what it thinks is human stubbornness, human detachment that it has to simulate. That was a good answer, right? Yeah. It makes sense. And it's not me speaking, it's language speaking here. If we have astral bodies, then we come into this world and we leave it continuously. What stays here? Language. This world is just language, which is human artifacts. And I think it's in the Bible, knowledgeable people in theology have told me that the angels couldn't create language, God couldn't create language, humans created language. So actually humans are the bees in the plant world that create language, and all technologies as extension of language. That is what is here and what is being built. And humans interact with that as souls reincarnating. So that should mean something. What did it mean to you? Or did that relate to the question?
Is God laughing?
My favorite medium, which is made up of a guy who channels 6,000 and 7,000 entities. This is my astral body part of myself, or my interest. I asked those 6,000 and 7,000 entities if they've experienced God, and they said, no, we haven't, but we will. So I think that's the closest you're going to get to an answer about that. You know, whether there's a God or not, or what it is, or some finality. Next. Has anybody here ever read Arthur Croker, the Canadian sociologist? Anybody here know Arthur Croker at Concordia University? Nope. Okay. You know the crop circles they're making in England? Okay, if you believe that extraterrestrials are making them, and I say they are, and I say they're from the civilization called Bootes. It's a constellation of 7 stars, one of them being Arcturus. It's kind of a favorite in science fiction. The Booteans are making the crop circles. But the reason they're making the crop circles is they have no idea what we're going to respond to. They're trying to figure out where can we connect. So they're making these in complex designs over the last 10 years, and it's like the best museum going in terms of language and artifact, and most people don't really aren't certain about where they're coming from. This thing is that these artifacts are being made so that the extraterrestrials can say, well, which ones are the humans responding to or find meaning in? Okay? So that's the archetypal rhetorical method. In Western culture, there was the battle between the dialecticians, the grammarians, and the rhetoricians. The rhetoricians always tried to figure out what the audience was into, and then tried to manipulate it. The dialecticians wouldn't care about what the audience thought or was listening for whatever reason the audience was listening. They would create a concept that you had to learn and understand, and somehow would help you. The ETs, the Booteans, are rhetoricians because they are watching what we respond to figure out what we think. They can't get into our brains. I mean, even though they're part of this universe, they can't, they're so different in their environment from ours, they're amazed at how we work within this limited structural pre-levitation situation with gravity. So that's what I'm doing here. And that's the drama of cognition, a tremendous phrase that I'm leading to. The drama of cognition is me looking at you, you look at me, one-on-one, many-to-many. That is the human essence. The fact that I'm taking input from you, you're taking input from me, and the environments around us. The drama of cognition is the essential archetype of all ritual, myth, and legend, which has been acted out in different forms in various cultures, from primitive tribes creating, having a drama of cognition with the sun, supposedly, and according to archaeological knowledge, having a drama with the sun and trying to recreate it every day. So they have the rituals, or the rain dance. That's a form of drama cognition. Then you have the philosophical drama of cognition when you become literate. Now you have the electronic drama of cognition, which is us interacting with the poltergeist. And as the poltergeist shrinks and becomes homeopathic, then the anthropomorphic physical has to interact and have a drama of cognition with itself. So the little kid with the laptop is having a drama of cognition more and more with itself, and that's why the future will wear. The future will wear his or her face. All right? So there's the drama of cognition, the interaction. So we have a drama of cognition happening right here. And so all times can resonate out of this thing. I have the drama of interacting with you and wondering what the heck you're responding to and why and what's the reason, and you have the same thing with me. Now, most human beings can't walk around with that awareness, even though it's always there, which is another aspect of the human stubbornness I talked about. They always little giggle in interaction with human beings, the kind of knowing that this is silly or it's a strange situation. So the sense of the weirdness. So technology is creating a situation where it's going to replay the intimacy of the human intuition of weirdness and the giggle of the drama of cognition. What is going on here? Beg your pardon? That's a good one, because I got a... what was the question? Oh, okay. How can I take the intensity? It's because I have access to really good health from a genius doctor wife. Okay, so that's a personal reason. If it isn't because of that, it's because I haven't worked in a 9-to-5 situation for 30 years. So that's an intense situation where you got to figure out meaning. You got to make meaning all the time. Now, I did work as a consultant. I'm saying I don't have to show up at work at 9 and 5 and have to worry about the rent and that. You know what I mean? So I'm living in the future. I'm living in the frictionless society. Been doing it for 30 years. So that's why the Android means focuses on me, because I've actually had to slack. And that's what the Matrix is about. That's another aspect. The Matrix is about someone who overcomes that problem of illusion that Morpheus gets Keanu Reeves to wake up to. So I would say Zappa had an album in 1982 called The Man from Utopia. That's what I am. But it's not a ridiculous situation. It's just taking time to meditate and intuit things without running away. So I show up for work every day. It's just on the phone all the time. And that's what most people do. They're on the phone. They're on electric media in our society. Now that's 1/5 of the world. The other 1/5 is going through malnutrition and AP hardships, incredibly. So if you go that way and think that way, then obviously we've got a software hell, antichrist, blah, blah, blah situation happening. But the fundamentalists, they don't have any aesthetic perception of the history of technology, and that's why they're kind of fading out now, because they can't deal with the simulation of the media situation that the kids are getting lost in, the Android meme situation, and which is seductive because of the AP. So the old cultural values of any culture cannot maintain a profile of wisdom and authority for the new discarnate and reappeared, recarnate kids in this new homeopathic technology. You follow what I'm saying? So if there are any parents here, you know. If there are any kids here, you know. Kids don't, there's no drama of cognition anymore there.
Bob, let's, if you don't mind, I'd like to get right down to the nitty-gritty and ask you, how can what you're telling me tonight give me more slack?
Well, that's the code words. You're an initiate. What level did you come in on that? See, slack is the code word. 5-letter word. We can make a lot out of those 5 letters. Well, if you go to my website, it tells you what to meditate on. And I say you study, and not all of yourself, but I say you study Marshall McLuhan, Lyndon LaRouche, the quote, anti-Semite who runs for president every year, and though he's not limited to that. You study Herbert W. Armstrong, you remember the Worldwide Church of God in the Plain Truth? And then you study Frank Zappa, and you study James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, and you study Dr. Beater, who you wouldn't know probably. You have to get his tapes, but there's a website you can get his stuff. And you can study the evergreens, the medium I'm talking about, or another medium, cosmic awareness. And then you can focus on a man in Dartmouth named Garrett Dean. Now, those are 9 situations, all right? Now, studying them is not you becoming a monk and memorizing them. You just, over the next 30 years, as cold fusion comes in and you're going to have more slack environmentally, that it engages your mind in such contradictory ways that you get rehearsed, you get more conscious of the quadrophenia innate in yourself. In other words, you got to become everybody. And you got to become every meme. And the yoga is not to disappear into, though 1/10 of you could disappear every now and then in the Himalayas or something and do astral body work. But the thing is, since this is language in this dimension, it's developing a skill in language, and that means not just verbal skills anymore. It means a sensitivity to the effects and causes of every linguistic extension, all median history. So McLuhan's a good inventory of that. And then you would then be able to understand Finney's Wake. Now, that's only on Wednesdays. The other days, you watch the drama of cognition, and you become aware that the slack is something that's always lurking there and includes not being happy. So there's 100 ways I could answer you, but basically buy my wife's book and get your health reinforced, because it is a genius encyclopedia. And if we actually come forward with the treatment for AIDS and major diseases over the next few years, which we're working on, that'll give you slack. All right? So basically, you keep in touch with me, you have slack. And because this is a decentralized homeopathic world, you actually can do that. You just email me. You know what I mean? Whereas you couldn't keep in touch with Einstein or James Joyce if you were living back there. You know, you end up just taking a course 30 years later on the guy, and it doesn't hold up. So anybody can be in my situation and offer themselves as information. So the dialogue of utopia is already here in the 90s media, but it's a software hell. The disservice is we have to promote cold fusion. So that's another thing. Now, are you a subscriber to the Church Subgenius, which I'm not involved in?
Not necessarily, no.
See, not necessarily. There's the autonomy there. I mean, what do you mean not necessarily? It depends on who's.
I mean, I've read books, certainly, and I've read many other books.
You haven't paid your $30?
I have not paid my $30. I am not a reverend.
Okay. Do you know what's going on right now in Brushwood, upstate New York? Tomorrow's July 5th. Do you know that much?
I do know tomorrow's July 5th.
And you know what that means?
No.
Well, if you read the book closely, the punchline is these terrifically monstrous, quote Zappa, monster magnet extraterrestrials are coming on July 5th, 1998. Right, to eat up 2/3 of the world, who are the pinks and deserve to be eaten up, and save the other third, which are the sub-geniuses. Right? That's the scenario of the Church of the Subgenius.
Yes, I thought I missed that.
Well, you did, but... yeah, no. Well, when I had my radio show in Toronto in the late 80s, I said that already happened. But church headquarters, which is just an interpretation of me, blah, 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 it's a spin-off thing, they refused to believe my updating of church doctrine. And so they waited till 98. And so they're meeting in upstate New York on July 5th, 98. And you can buy the videos that show it. They have a weekend of ranting and celebrating, and they're all going to get what they call the rupture, taking off the fundamentalist rapture. They're going to get ruptured. And so at 7 o'clock, their leader, Reverend Ivan Stang, stood there, and they're counting down 10, 9, 8, 7, because it happens at 7 a.m. So nothing happened. So he counted it down again. Maybe a little off. 10, 9, 8. It gets to 0, nothing happens. So the people jump on him, or the sub-geniuses, there's about 400 of them, jump on him, cart him off, take his clothes off, tar him with feathers and maple syrup, and throw him in the lake, and they're all chiding them. And I have seen the video because I wasn't there. I have the video I eventually got. And so what happens? They go, so the Canadian Bob Dobbs was right. And they kept saying, the Canadian Bob Dobbs was right. And he goes, yeah, go to Canada. Okay. So some like you show up in Canada, where I'm not, and find me. But the situation is they continue going back there. 99, 2000, they're there tonight, waiting for 7 o'clock tomorrow morning to do it again and hope the X's show up. And maybe their watches were off. So it is happening tonight. Now, this wasn't planned, but I'm here giving the fully developed church doctrine beyond their comprehension here in Canada. Now that's patriotic. Okay? So there's slack. That's slack, that you're here and not in Brushwood, because they're going to do more than tar and feather him if this keeps going on, you know. So is there any other secrets? You know, I've always been tempted to really give out the good secret. Since you're such a dull audience and don't have a very good drama of cognition, what is the secret of the 20th century?
Yeah.
Well, no, what is it? Well, okay, somebody's got to guess it. What is the one that you're never going to find out that is the midpoint of understanding the 20th century? Not the midpoint, the fulcrum of understanding the 20th century. What would it be? What don't you know that you're interested in, you might want to know, and know you're never going to find out? Can't even think. There's no reference point. See, it's a post-information society. It doesn't even matter what the secret was, right? Anybody going to guess? Come on. That's that guy there. No. An event of the 20th century. An event of the 20th century that hasn't been...
Okay, who killed Kennedy?
See, it comes up. Who killed Kennedy? Okay, now, I've been under pressure because I know exactly what happened. And if I ever stated in the media, I'd be killed immediately, okay, if it got out. And the people who put me out or provided a forum for it would be troubled greatly. So are you guys willing to take the risk? I don't think I am, because... No, really, I've been known to say that I was involved. That's on the public record. That's how I know. You know, I mean, I don't look 79, but I am. And I was involved in America from 1954 till early 80s. So, I thought about this. I said, how can I give my fellow Canadians, and I was originally born in Paris, so I became a Canadian later. So I'm originally French. But how can I give my fellow Canadians something that I won't give those guys down at Brushwood waiting for Exodus to come, right? Or extraterrestrial. So I thought, well, give them the truth in the Kennedy assassination. But I've been told never to say it. So what is a drama of cognition, right? How much do we want to know? Do you guys want me to be sacrificed for your pleasure so you can have the tape and say, look, I was there, the guy killed you, opted for us? Yeah. You guys got to get it out of me and realize the seriousness of what I'm talking about. No, you don't have to realize it. You don't know if it's serious. See, you don't know. You don't know if it's important. But I tell you, it is the most important historical fact to understand what happened over the last 40 years, including the AIDS virus. But that's another thing. So so you got to get it out of me. So what would you ask? Permadex is the group named in what's called the Torbet document, and it lays out five factions. Maybe you can help me on this, Art. One is an elite in NASA. Another faction is the White Russians group that came out of Soviet Union, in the 20s and 30s, and was very powerful down in Dallas-Fort Worth area. The main figure for that is George Zamorinschil. That's the White Russians. The other part is the old mafia that ran in Cuba, that ran Cuba before Castro. The fourth part laid out in the Torbet document, and you can buy this book. You couldn't get it for decades, but it is available in the 90s. I saw it in bookstores. The fourth part is the Nazi scientists that were brought over in Project Paperclip, which overlaps with the NASA. Okay, so you got the Project Paperclips, you got the Nazi scientists, you've got the White Russians, you've got the mafia, and you've got, you remember, Art? And Las Vegas mafia was part of it, and there may have been... Now, here's what's real interesting. In the Torbet document, they highlight, talking about Art, they highlight Jean Demenil. Jean Demenil was the husband, a Paris banker who married Dominique Schlumberger. And they came over during World War II or after, and they set up a little money empire in Houston and created the Mark Rothko Chapel. And the de Menil family, the Schlumberger is becoming de Menil under this guy, who's a Wall Street banker or Houston banker, international banker, till he dies in 73. Now, he was accused of being part of the Southern faction, the Houston-Dallas faction, the oil companies. I don't think the oil companies are named as a faction in the Torp. Right. I haven't looked into that. It's not totally right, so that's why it's not important. But it's good to have that background because it does focus on more accurate possibilities than anybody else ever came up with. So the oil power in Dallas, their man was John de Menil. So if you go to the Warren Commission reports, they have whole inventory you can read of their questioning of him. He was considered a suspect and brought in. Okay. Now what's interesting is his wife and their children are the art establishment of North America, or of New York, but that's North America. They are the ones who introduced Fred Hughes, their own employee, to Andy Warhol. This is in like 66, 67, maybe even 65. It was, Warhol was just a bohemian guy in the village and had that little thing going with the Campbell soup cans, but that's a passing fad because you have op art and the other kinds of art fads, 65, 67, so he can be moved aside easily. But because Fred Hughes, this incredible manager who came out of the de Menil Foundation, was able to market him better in 69, 70, 71 through Interview magazine, Warhol had staying power. So that's just Warhol. They have propped up every other major artist in all the different movements of the 60s and 70s, and they have a center in New York called DIA, Center for the Arts. So they have a huge investment in art, which is, after World War II, a lot of wealthy people have to, since money is obsolete, money's become public property in a welfare state, whether it's Russian or communist or Nazi or American, democratic socialist or capitalist, you have a basic fact after the collapse of money in 1929 that the money's public property, so it's a guaranteed income. It may be puny, but it's there as a necessary environment that you have to have. So money is no longer private property, so what the money oligarchy invest in is objects, the art object. That becomes a kind of simulated gold standard. And that's the beginning of the information environment. The art object becomes the gold standard, as gold is obsolete. And so the Rockefellers create the Museum of Modern Art. So the de Menil and the Guggenheims do their thing. So the de Menil are very important people in the art world after the Museum of Modern Art and after Guggenheim. Here's their father is implicated in the Kennedy assassination. Guess who married one of the daughters of the de Menil couple? Ted Carpenter, the man who made the discovery with Don Thiel and Marcia McLuhan, the discovery of the macro-meme-ome project, the meme-ome project. So there's Ted Carpenter living down in New York City with a potential scandal in his family situation, and people wonder if it's true or not.
Yeah, but what's more important about who killed JFK or why did they kill JFK?
It may be the same thing. The why is the who. The who did it, and once you knew who did it, then you know why. Wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be? Or maybe it only seems obvious to me because I know. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about that? Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial.
Well, no. See, now you got to ask. Okay, so who brought up the Torba document? I don't know. Well.
I said Permindex.
Yeah. So Permindex is wrong. Ted Carpenter can relax. His husband, his father-in-law, was not involved. Hey, come on. Anybody got? How do we pursue this? What? No. He uses his family history of growing up with the oligarchy and all that, but he basically was on the side of the assassinated. You know, he was a friend of Jackie Kennedy and the Kennedys, so he's a commiserating, bitter person who generalizes into an anti-oligarchic situation. He criticizes the elections as phony and the oligarch, but that's a 19th century view. I think what would add to the thing about art being the gold standard, you can see how that flips into movies, TV, and then in the 90s, money, the oligarchic people that Gore came out of and says run America, which they don't, the money throws itself at the internet just to be part of it. You see what I'm saying? So the internet is the ultimate art form, the Android meme that was predicted by the value of art as the gold standard after money became public property. So information props up the oligarchy, and so they merge. Information and the oligarchy are the same thing. But the oligarchy is a simulated situation, and it's going to be a cyborg. You know, if you're a Rockefeller, and you're 7th generation, they're 5 or 5th generation now, say the 6th generation meets its clone. You got to have the name Rockefeller to have access to those trust funds. Who's going to get it? Now that's a dilemma for them as much as for anybody else. So what? Somebody had a point down there.
Why?
Yeah, sorry. Why are we?
The why would tell you. What? Well, I tried to explain that because the machine wants to become a human being. So it's going to end up in the Garden of Eden of a physical form. While we, and I would say the cyborg, it's an extension of the 1/5 of our self, the neuron self. Maybe the human archetype, because a cyborg is going to listen to, have an internet and chip technology, and it'll be communicating. And that's, I say, part of its body. So the cyborg, the idea of this replica of the human form is not what we are made up of. That's another the falsity of the human genome. They're just trying to replicate the human form, or 1/5 of us, the neuron, and let's include the archetype. So I should say 2/5 of us. The astrobody, the chip, which is all the media that's now part of us, you answering your email under great demand, and the other part was a TV screen, which will get tinier and tinier. So the cyborg is only one part of us. So I'm saying that the memome project is a challenge to the limitation that the cyborg teleological endpoint is limited by, right? So so technology, if it's true that it's a software hell and can't really create something that it promises, and the antidote to that is cold fusion, then it has to show up as a cyborg as the final confusion of you, the final hypnosis, the final mirror, like Narcissus looking in the mirror. So, that's a serious part of what I'm saying, is that think of what we are, our bodies, and I don't limit it to let's be spiritual and believe that we have a life after death. We've got to realize that this world is language and technology and mimic, and that is really what we're going to reincarnate in, if you believe in life after death. And that's what we're dealing with. And if we consider that our bodies, not just the neurological, biological, or human form apparent situation, then that's an important first step to counter the situation. Which is what Zappa, McLuhan, and Joyce did. How they beat the web. The web's the Antichrist. The web is the Android meme. So the cyborg is, that's why Blade Runner is not an accurate description of the 80s. So I would say most people think the future and the 1/5 of ourselves that's involved with genetic engineering, that was the collective epistemological parts. Remember? NASA, X-Files, CIA, genetic engineering, and human scale. The genetic engineering aspect on the collective level is only 1/5 of us, and that's the cyborg image. So, as Finnegan's Wake points out, no image of anything about our anthropomorphic form is the image of what we are. So, you know, these people describe PAM, which I just realized, that's PAM. Android meme and AP mixed together. You know, PAM, AP, goes both ways. But they're describing her and accepting 4 parts of herself. What? You know Pamela Anderson? Pamela Anderson, maybe you don't watch TV?
She doesn't know about the Unruh magazine.
Yeah, but does she know who Pamela Anderson is?
Some blonde chick.
Yes, some blonde silicon chip, not chick, silicon chip. Yeah.